guess we're getting started. So thanks for being here. I know we're almost through the afternoon sessions here. So I see we got some cookies. Hopefully you got coffee beforehand too.
No, I did that this
All right. So I always like to know who I'm talking to, right? So I'm going to take a show of hands poll here, so I can make sure I'm not telling you stuff you already know, or if at least I am, I try to make it a little more interesting. So who here kind of came up through the IT side of security? All right, yep. Who here came up as like an automation person and is learning security or has learned it? Has learned it. All right, good. So as is usual, the minority is the OT guys that are learning cyber, but we got a lot of IT pros in here that I hope you would consider yourself learners on the OT part of cybersecurity, right? This is not a technical talk really at all today. This is really talking about how do we get from a culture where in the OT side we've become very cognizant of the safety aspects that we need to be thinking about in our plants, in our OT environments, to that same kind of thought process, even maybe to the point we start our meetings these days in a lot of plants with a safety moment, right? A safety minute. We need to get to that point from a cybersecurity perspective where we're going to start our meetings with, hey, what do we need to be thinking about cybersecurity today, right? And what's the new threat? What's the new thing that we need to be doing? So that's where we're kind of going here. I think this is the easiest model to take, the safety model. When you think about it, if you have spent any time in a OT company, a manufacturing company, any kind of like oil, gas company, even, distribution centers where there's lots of moving stuff. Safety is very paramount, and we spend a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, we've got a machine, and it needs some safety upgrades or whatever, and we do that, and then we go on about our business, and then later we figure out, oh, it needs something else, or we order a new machine, and we forgot to spec, the new safety stuff on that machine, so we got to go back and do the same thing. To today, most folks have a very highly functioning safety team, right? They've got resources that are assigned for safety, and that's what they do all day long. And it's a continuous improvement type of process, right? And so that's really, I think, where we need to get to with OT cyber. So just kind of a little background. Probably not a lot of news to folks, but we're in this digitalization age, right? So data is king, and that's really driving a lot of this need for connecting, the OT side to the IT side, and that's great, and it's not going anywhere, but it brings with it the additional risks, right? And then we have on the OT side again, we saw most folks are IT practitioners now trying to come over and kind of help the OT side, right? Get up to speed with the cybersecurity. So we got that knowledge gap that we need to fill. And then the bad guys, I'm from North Carolina, so excuse me. The bad guys are getting badder all the time. They're getting smarter. They're getting more well-funded. They figured out they can make money, so they're not going anywhere, right? They're gonna keep doing what they're doing. And they're spending a lot of time and effort trying to get better at their craft, right? And part of that is there's the same infrastructure that we're using to get better and more efficient at our jobs, they're using. They're using cloud services. They're using AI and machine learning. And they even have now ransomware as a service or malware as a service. And they're even differentiated. They have the breaking or the network access team that then hands it off to the recon team, figure out where they are, how much they're going to be able to charge, hand that off to the deployment team. Does this sound familiar to IT people? Then they hand that off once they've deployed to customer service, believe it or not. Who's going to tell the board how to fill a Bitcoin wallet with millions of dollars that they can then give to them? So they have actual customer service. And how do you use the decryption key to actually get access to your data once they've sold it to you? So they've really differentiated themselves. It's crazy. So we're in a bad situation, not getting much better. And this is what I was talking about earlier. On the safety side, it took us 2-3 decades to figure out, hey, we need to think about safety in a continuous improvement process perspective versus just individual projects. On the OT side of the house, we're still, in most cases, doing individual projects to get more cyber secure. We're adding an IDS. We're trying to lock down Windows. And those are individual projects, and a lot of times we don't have this continuous improvement team that's thinking about it from a risk perspective. What do I do next with my next bucket of money, right? So if I feel like I'm successful if you all walk out of here today thinking that, if you're not already part of that solution, that you can be, and that not only can you be individually that part of that solution, but you can help put together that team continuous improvement approach. Anybody think that that's possible? Excellent. Yes. All right. So, famous saying, right? You must become the change that you want to see. What does that mean? We really need to, if we're helping start this or create this culture within our companies, we really have to kind of know our stuff, right? But fortunately, at least and most of you, if you're already IT or OT, it should be interesting to you, right? It has an effect on you and your company. And you probably wouldn't be in this room if it wasn't interesting to you, right? So that's good news. We get to learn cool stuff. And then we get to tell stories, right? Who here doesn't like to tell a good story from like the weekend or whatever when you get back to work the next day, right? I mean, most all of us do that. Well, we can learn to do that with cyber, right? And tell it to the right people at the right levels in the right language, and now you've got people on your side going, oh yeah, we need to do more of that, right? And you're helping create that culture. And then, if nothing else, if you can't get anybody else involved, just start like my previous guy that was in here. I don't know how many were in that talk, but he's like, just do something, right? Move, right? Move towards a more secure posture. And there's lots of things we can do individually, even if we can't get that team going initially. So, how do we learn more, right? This is the easy part, right? The headlines are coming at us every day, something new, right? This is just some of the more recent stuff. And I would consider this OT related, most of it. But even if it's IT, it applies if it's cyber. And one of the things that we can talk about a lot is this regulation piece too, right? If you didn't know it, Congress is very interested, at least in making it look like they're doing something about cybersecurity, right? So in the last session of Congress, I haven't totaled up this current session, but the last session of Congress, there were over 115 bills that were introduced that had something to do with cybersecurity. Some of them, luckily, were about funding and making it easier to deal with it, but a lot of it was regulatory in nature, right? What are we going to make people do? So and I don't think that's going away, right? Every time you have another attack, MGM, Clorox, whatever, the local representative goes, I'm going to do something about that, right? And make it look like the U.S. is doing something about it. Got numerous executive orders out there. The state governments are not immune to the, hey, I can look better if it looks like I'm doing something about cybersecurity, making things better. We've got our European friends over there that are actually passing new directives that have some teeth to them. I don't know if who here has heard of NIS 2? Have you heard what the new kind of requirements are that are, pretty onerous? So up to 10 million euro fine if you're not compliant. And the big teeth that they put into it is the board of directors can be held personally responsible. So see the tie into safety? There's always an officer in the company that's responsible and can go to jail if there's a negligent safety incident. It's going to be the same way, at least in Europe now. Wouldn't think it's going to take too much time to come to the U.S., where individuals can be held personally responsible for cyber breaches. So that's coming. And then, it's an alphabet soup of all the different agencies that are adding additional regulations, depending on your sector, depending on, the day of the week, whether or not you're going to get a new regulation out of somebody, right? So, and then the other kind of bedrock is understanding, what things are out there to help us, right? What do you rely on to kind of build a program? Fortunately, we have OT-specific standards that are out there. Anybody here hear of IEC 62443? It's a mouthful, but we got some not. That's fine. Pull the presentation down later, but be sure to look up IEC 62443. If you're doing anything in OT cybersecurity, that's the de facto international standard for OT cybersecurity. And then in the US, there's NIST 800-82. That's more if you're around a government type installation, that's what you're probably going to be directed to use because it's the National Institute of Safety or of Standards and Technology, so the US based organization. Actually, the IEC is organized and run and updated by ISA in the US. It's just been adopted internationally, so they're both US kind of controlled. Obviously, they have folks from around the world that are contributing to those. And the other thing to know is they've been around for almost 25 years. So there's a lot of good experience baked in to those standards. And then we have frameworks. The difference between standard and a framework is the framework helps you look at so the standard has the controls that you can apply, right, to your systems and how you might want to apply those, kind of the technical piece of it. The framework looks at what have you done and where do you want to go and how do you look at that from a risk perspective, right, to advance the technology in the plant. And then a maturity model looks at the organization and says, do I have the right people? Do they have the right experience? Can they maintain the systems that I'm putting in, right? Can they create that continuous improvement process? Do they have that knowledge and capability? So a lot of the people think of them as the same kind of thing, but they're a little bit different and they help you in a little bit different ways. Okay, so that's kind of the knowledge part. If you get that down, I tell people, if you've been in a plant and you've programmed a PLC, cybersecurity is easy. It's not hard. It's just different, right? And it's a new thing to learn. Folks from the IT side, you probably are coming over here because you already are in the cyber side, and you need to learn a little bit about how do we deploy that on the OT side, right? In a way that OT people don't get a little upset with you. So that's probably never happened. We talked about this earlier, right? We've got all this data that we're being asked to serve up and ingest so that we have better relationships with customer suppliers, regulatory agencies, all those kind of things that it's not going to go away. But since the beginning of networks, we've also had risks that come along with those networks. I think it was within months after the original ARPA internet, that was established, somebody had written a worm that went around and, filled up the memory of all those campus computers and crashed them all. And so we knew from way back that was a risk, but now we figured out how to, monetize it, and That's made all the difference. So when I start talking to folks at a specific plant, I always want to know kind of where are they, right? Because everybody starts at a different place in their journey. But I also want to make sure they understand that it is a journey, right? We're not going to fix it tomorrow. We're not going to fix it in a month. We're not even going to fix it in a year, typically, unless you've got unlimited budgets and unlimited resources. So it's a 3 to 5 year process, typically, to get to, yeah, I can go home at night and not worry about this so much, right? I've done everything I can do within reason. And so that's just understanding that is important. And another thing is, a lot of times people start talking to us when they're putting in a SIM or an IDS or something, and we're like, great, that's going to do you a lot of good, but please let's look at these things kind of on the front end, and if you don't have backups yet, let's fix that first, right? Because from a ransomware perspective, that's going to be your best defense, right? Is to be able to recover on your own. Because if let's say you get ransomware and you pay the ransom, what do you now have to do?
Restore.
Yeah, but you have to, so
you got to
decrypt it, and then what do you have once you've decrypted the computer?
Malware infected.
Yeah.
You still got malware on your computer, so you still have to start from scratch at some point to reload everything.
And these are criminals. Can you trust what they're doing? I mean, come on.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the last statistic I saw was about 30 to 40% of the time, even if they pay the ransom, it doesn't work. And even if it does work, the criminals spend all their time and effort figuring out how to encrypt things really fast, but they don't care about how long it takes to decrypt, right? Or if it really even works well. By the time you got the key, they've got their money. So they don't really care. But anyway, so backups for this is the one kind of stomp moment is make sure you got good backups. And the only way you can be sure is if you're actually testing those backups and on a periodic basis are restoring at least one type of each type of system you have in your. It's better to do them all, but you can start by doing one type every downtime or every quarter or something.
Is it okay to use the digital clones when they're available for that purpose?
Yes, if you test them, make sure they're tested because they're not really a clone unless you tested and made sure they're a clone. And you know how to cut over, right, between. And then there's also issues today, even with restoring from backups. If you're restoring to new bare metal machines, you're probably going to have to relicense everything. And if you've got some security built in now and you're using certificates and stuff, you're going to have to do all that again too, right? And certificate everything. So there's some procedures there that you need to be familiar with, or at least have good procedures written so that you can follow them when you're in the middle of the, oh crap, I got to get this back up as soon as possible. It's not good to be trying to figure out how to restore a server the first time when you're under the gun, right? Of course, a lot of people tell me, oh, we're not a target. We make, tissue paper or baby formula or something. Who's going to target us? And I think most people are getting the idea now, finally, that you don't have to be a target to be affected, right? You can still be in the blast radius, right, even if you're not the target. And this is one way I kind of demonstrate that, right? If we think about the poor Ukrainians have had a rough time with the Russians for quite a while now. The latest stuff that's going on there is only the worst and latest. It's not by any means all of what's happened, right? So in 2015, right before Christmas, the Russians shut the lights off for about 230,000 residents around Kiev. They got into the electrical power distribution system and they were able to remotely turn those breakers off, the protection relays. They turned them off and then they did them a real solid and downloaded bad firmware to them and bricked them. So they were not too nice. And Kiev, I've never been there, but I understand in December it's not very warm. And so not only did they turn the lights off, but they also put a lot of people at danger of actually, freezing to death. It wasn't very nice. And then unfortunately in 2016 they did it again. Not as long. I think it only took them about a day, or maybe even this is 90 minutes. There you go, to recover that time. But they still got in after they'd done the same thing the previous year. And then in 2017, anybody here hear of NotPetya? It's kind of yeah, we got a few. So that was a Russian attack, but this was the first that I know of supply chain attack. Like you've heard of SolarWinds, probably most of you. This was the same kind of idea as SolarWinds. They got into the tax software that Ukraine requires people to use to report their tax liability back to Ukraine. And in the European Union, almost every country, probably every country, has some kind of business with Ukraine or a company based in Ukraine. And so they're all downloading the update to their tax software for the new tax year, and the Russians had inserted a virus into that tax update. So all those companies were infected, and we know of at least documented $10 billion plus for OT companies that was the cost to recover. Merck, the big drug company alone, $1.4 billion, and they're still fighting with their insurance company about whether or not they're going to pay or whether they have to pay, because the insurance company says, oh, that's force majeure, it was a war attack from Russia. We don't have to pay in times of war. So far, they've lost twice, but they're appealing the third time. So we're now 6 years later, and they still haven't got their money back from their insurance. So I'm not saying insurance is not a good thing or a good part of planning, but just be aware there are limitations, and it's not going to cover everything by any means. Like, it's not going to cover your reputation. It's not going to cover how your employees feel after they have to work, 24/7 for a month, all that. And then, of course, we've got what's going on now. I don't know, it was in the news very briefly, and it was, to me, it seemed very quiet. But back last year in May, we found some pretty nasty, very OT-specific malware in all of our, well, not all, but a lot of our liquefied natural gas infrastructure along the Gulf. Very coincident timing, since this was when Russia was threatening to turn off the gas to Europe, and then the pipeline got blown up, and then all of a sudden we had malware in our infrastructure. So we are pretty certain where that came from, right? But that's another, just would you normally be thinking, hey, I'm going to be getting attacked by the Russians, in a liquefied natural gas facility in the U.S.? Most people probably wouldn't have thought about it until it happened, right? So, but it can happen, even if you don't think about it. Another good story out there to tell is the Oldsmar, water system attack. Who here hasn't heard of that? Anybody? Okay, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, but yeah, they got in through an old TeamViewer that shouldn't even been still available because they weren't using it, and then they were able to crank up the lye, or the the official name there, sodium hydroxide, to 100. Was it 100 times or 1,000 times? 100 times, if I do my math right. The normal level, which was not going to be very healthy for the people. Luckily, we had an operator that was doing his job, was sitting there, saw it happen, and was able to fix it before it affected anybody. But that's still a not very comfortable idea that can happen. And this was actually the third attack within a year of a water system. Very similar things had happened at another one in California got attacked, and they turned off all the safety systems and tried to do something similar where it was going to make the drinking water not potable, right? And then, if you're driving down the road, who here listens to books on tape or Audible or whatever to kind of pass the time? Or who here likes to read a good novel? Anybody? Okay. There's some really good stories out there in the OT cyber space, right? Kevin Mitnick not so much OT, but still an interesting story, kind of one of the first real high-profile hackers. You know, he goes back to the days where he thought he was doing cool stuff by putting a toner on a payphone, you know, and getting free phone calls. But then we got, you know, some really, really cool ones, Stuxnet, and then the Sandworm one is really well written, I think. Really kind of tracing all the stuff that the Russians have done from the Sandworm is the code word we have for one of their military hacking units over there, and it's a really, really good story. So you got a lot of information, you got some stories to tell, you might have some stories from your personal experience, you know, getting hacked, or a friend you might know, or a plant that you might know that might have been hacked. You know, I'm not saying it was yours, but those are all good stories, right, that you can tell and get people's attention. But if you can't really get them their attention with the stories, maybe hit them with some more facts, okay? So we got, there are, you know, legal responsibilities of companies out there, right? Who here's heard of OSHA? Right? OSHA is now looking at cybersecurity as a key factor in making sure that the plant's safe, right? We're running safety systems over these networks and through these PLCs and computers. We got to make sure that that foundation is secure, or we can't be sure that we are safe and that our employees are going to be safe. And then, you know, from a financial perspective, if the safety systems do their thing and shut the process down because of an attack, now we're not making stuff, right? So now we got the financial aspect, and the SEC just upped the ante a little bit and said, hey, you got to report now within 72 hours of knowing that it's a material attack or a material effect on your financials as a public company. So that's a new thing. And then, like I said, NIST 2 over in Europe, they're going to fine the directors directly if they're negligent. And then you got the EPA out there that's looking at cybersecurity as far as air permits and water permits, because, again, those systems are running on networks and OT systems that can be hacked. And so you got to make sure that you've got at least a reasonable amount of security, or they're not going to give you the permit. So it's hard to make stuff without air permits and water permits for most plants that are doing any kind of OT stuff. So the other thing you can inform your management about is, you know, there's lots of requirements or obligations, we'll say, just from being in any kind of leadership. And I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to flip through a lot of this, but you really need to understand OT cyber and what it means to your plant from a risk perspective. You need to develop that strategy and figure out, you know, how am I going to protect the plant, and you need to start at the strategy level, right, and kind of lay out a plan so that then you can make those day-to-day tactical decisions and how to deploy resources and capital and all that. So there's this kind of buzzword out there, operationalizing cybersecurity. If you hear that, it just means turning that strategy into real actions, right? Don't be fooled. If you're compliant, it does not mean you are secure. You know, if you're compliant, that just means you're up to date with the standard and you're compliant with that. But that standard, even in the best of times, can be a year, 2, 3 years old as far as what it's protecting against and helping you understand. I'm not going to have time to go through this to a large extent, but there is an ROI for OT cybersecurity, even in addition to avoiding an incident, right? We can go through this. Just the number one is having a better understanding of how your network works, and if you go through the process of updating the network, you're going to be in a much better, more resilient state than you were before. Get that action plan, you know, charter an OT cybersecurity program, get those backups in place, get people talking, IT and OT talking. Sometimes that can be difficult. You know, one of my colleagues calls me the IT-OT marriage counselor sometimes because I have to get the two in the room and help them see the other's needs and that they're, you know, how they can be met while still staying true to themselves and all that. So there's some truth to that, right? And then start applying those controls from a risk-based perspective. I'm not going to read the questions, but there's some good questions there to start asking management or other leaders within your company to kind of help them see the need. So I'm out of time, but any questions, thoughts, comments?
You available to come talk to my IT folks?
Absolutely. We'll hold hands, sing Kumbaya,
Bring your
do it
referee
all.
outfit.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I do that quite a bit, actually. Anything? Anybody? All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it. Hope you have a good conference.